Oh, yeah, you're right, all right. How's it going? Grant, you're you. This is the Doodle Review. Today is the first in a new ongoing series I'm calling Chattin Fraff. In this series, I'll be inviting guests on to shoot shit on a specific topic, usually an album. Today, I invited Ryan from Anti Art to chat about the first Nine Inch Nails record, Pretty Hate Machine. If you're not familiar with Anti Art, you can find them on Instagram or on Substack, where they offer reviews, recommendations, hot takes, and most importantly, first class memes on alternative underground art, pop music, and pop culture in general. We kind of started existing online at a very similar time, and I continue to refer to Ryan's writing when I need a doorway into what is actually, cool in the culture right now. Highly recommend the Gram content and the newsletter, both of which I'm going to link below in the description. Ryan also has a musical project called The Sacred, so far releasing one great single, which is Rat City / Under God, with more to come. And if you've clicked on this because you're interested in Pretty Hate Machine, now would be a good time to check this band out. Check out The Sacred, because there is definitely a late 80s industrial pop vibe to the music they're creating. Our conversation is very loose, very freeform, always coming from a place of being, lovers and not experts. So feel free to correct anything we say in the comments if you know better. And I hope you enjoy the conversation. The way
Cheers.
I like to start all of these things off is just completely unrelated. But if we were to look at your Spotify, Apple Music, or whatever, like, what is literally the last song that you were just listening to before getting on there?
That is a great question. Let's see. Besides those demos and besides the Nine Inch Nails album, I was listening to an episode of the Shane Gillis podcast, the most recent episode.
Amazing. Complete 180 from where we're at. Love that. Are
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah.
you a big podcast listener in general? Like, what's your mix of music versus podcast sort of listening?
Yeah, I listen to a lot of stuff on YouTube as well. I like
Hmm.
like it's kind of lame, but I enjoy like debate content and that kind of stuff, like people screaming at each other about politics and social issues and stuff like that.
No, right on. I can get with
Um,
that. I feel like you learn some stuff from that sort of stuff. Sometimes my patience wears thin when people get like too argumentative,
yeah,
but
Yeah, if it's like a 4 hour, there was like a Norman Finkelstein and Destiny thing debate or whatever. It was like 6 hours long on Israel and
oh,
Palestine. That was a fucking waste of time. That stuff. So you got to
jeez.
kind of you can't spend your whole time watching that stuff. It'll suck you in.
But at the same time, you've got to get to the end to know whether it was worth it, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Cool. Well, outside of that, obviously, you've been running anti. I feel like, when did you start, or when did anti art get started? 'Cause it feels like around I just started doing a review like 2020, like lockdown basically, and then I started noticing you guys. Like, is it a similar thing?
Yeah, I think we came up around sort of the same-ish time. It
Yeah.
was October 2020, so it was like the end of the COVID year, the first year
Hmm.
of COVID. Yeah, me and my buddy Troy, we started it in his apartment in Philadelphia. Just like kind of, I forgot exactly the impetus for starting it. I think we started it because Pitchfork had given Machine Gun Kelly like a really solid grade or something like that, and I think they gave like 21 Savage like less of a grade. It was like they gave him like a 6.6, and then they gave Machine Gun Kelly like a 6.8 or something along those lines. So we were just like, fuck this, fuck Pitchfork.
Hey, that's
Um,
enough to get anyone's blood boiling. I know, what were they thinking?
Yeah, I don't know. I think they're owned by a giant media conglomerate, so probably like there was some sort of tie-in. I'm sure he had some sort of connection to get like the extra 2.2 to his score or whatever.
Definitely. And then, so now, on top of like music, pop culture commentary, obviously you've just put out some music with The Sacred.
Mhm.
Um, was listening to it this weekend. Love it. It's pretty cool. What's the
Thank you.
aspirations of what was the kind of starting point? What's the aspirations of the project? Are you going to be doing more, playing live? What's going on?
Yeah, I have a couple things going on. We're in the midst. It's me and my friend Zoe. She goes by Google. It's her like production name. So the two of us have been cooking stuff up on her computer. So we got to like get it mixed and all that kind of stuff. So we're working on like an EP. You realize like as you like when you review music, you're like, oh, like they could have used a better mix, or they could have used a better this or that. Like, oh, they could use the better microphone. You don't realize like all that stuff costs like a lot of money. So
Yeah.
so I've been more gracious, I think, with when I listen to new music. Um, with giving people a little bit of slack
Yeah,
because
yeah,
I
yeah.
know that it's really, especially now, it's really hard to get funding for independent music. But yeah, we're
Totally.
working on an EP. We have like two songs in the bank. We have to make like three more to make this full EP or whatever. But yeah, that should hopefully be coming in October. And then I think we're going to be playing a live show. There's some like venue downtown in New York. It's called Gonzo's. It's like a recording studio slash live space. In I think like May 8th or something. We're trying to play a show. So that'll be
Awesome.
the first show.
What's the live configuration? Like how are you presenting it? Because obviously it's quite digital, quite electronic,
Yeah.
you know.
I think to start we're gonna just do like DJ and microphone.
Uh-huh.
But I'm hoping that as we get more comfortable playing live, she's really good with piano, like naturally very good. So I'm hoping to get a synth set up in there, and then in the future, I'm definitely inspired by this. It's good that we're doing this album. I'm inspired by the way he did it because the way he did this album, The Pretty Hate Machine, Trent Reznor, like he um, recorded most of it without like drums and guitar and that kind of stuff. It's mostly like a solo. It's pretty much like a solo album.
Totally.
And then afterward, he found a band to play live with, and then that live band transitioned into like his full band for the next album. So I that's kind of like my hope with the project to continue to add members. I don't want it to be a solo project because I find there's too many like first name last name like Chappelle Roan or like Renee Rapp or like whatever. Like there's so many solo. A lot of solo stuff out now, and I want to try to create more of a vibe and have more of a band. It's
Yep.
like that's the ultimate goal. Yeah.
I always think, maybe I suppose Nine Inch Nails always kind of it became very well known very early on. And part of the mythology of it, it was that it's like, oh, it's just Trent. But like, I've always liked the idea of the band as a framework, even if there is maybe one person that's like the driving force, because it doesn't then pen them in. Like I think of if you think of Tame Impala or like a Queens of the Stone Age or other bands, like they've opened themselves to the ability to have other people come in and come out and like do whatever. It doesn't have to fall under like Kevin Parker or whatever. So I feel like it's a pretty good like strategy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good. I'm just inspired by like a lot of different bands. Like I feel like a lot of rock bands are like kind of half solo endeavors, half like band things. Like I don't know, like I saw like the 1975, for example. Like
Mhm.
obviously Maddie is kind of like the driving force and like he's very egotistical and like that's like a part it like plays into the whole thing. But then you have like George on drums and George is like working with Charlie on her album. So you kind of like have
Mhm.
more you have individual people in the band who are doing really specific and cool things and then they offshoot to other projects. So I find that I like that idea of like everybody in the band has a role and
Yep.
like they all have their particular set of skills rather than like like I'm going as Ryan, like it's
Hmm.
just me and then I have like a replaceable backing band that like filters out, you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. I love
But
that. Well, let's get into it then, because we're already like jumping ahead. Like I'm gonna hit with the facts and then we'll go into it. So Pretty Hate
wait.
Machine, first Nine Inch Nails album, 1989, put out on the
Mhm,
now defunct TVT Records. Which obviously
mhm.
there's some stories behind that. As we said, written and performed almost entirely by Trent Reznor, who was like 23 or 24 at the time, which
Yeah.
is like enough to make
So-
you feel bad.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You got such a good head start.
Exactly. Although contributions from Flood, Richard Patrick, Chris Venner, who I think I've read is like potentially had a little bit more to do with the early recordings than is necessarily credited for, particularly in what you're saying, like bringing the music to a live setting. I want to get that out there because I got absolutely cooked in another video I did where I suggested that someone was not a founding member and I think someone, I don't know whether their mum basically like got on the comment page and was like, you're trying to rewrite history, blah, blah, blah. So I just want to be
Oh my
known.
God.
Okay. There's other people out there. I'm a lover, not an expert. I don't have all the facts. Comment if you want to take us to task on something, but we're not claiming to be an expert. Um, the record peaked at number 75 at the time, but on the Billboard charts, but ultimately gained a following, word of mouth, and then basically created the legacy. So I wanted
Mhm.
to chat to you about it in particular, Ryan, because over the years of being a pretty avid follower of anti-art on your page, like this is the album that I always see kind of like coming back as a seems to be a critical reference point, even if it comes up just as like a meme here or there, or like something more substantial in the written form. So yeah, I guess you seem like the perfect person to talk to about it. How did you get introduced to Pretty Hate Machine? Because you're a mid 90s baby, right? Like, so it's not from your era or before your
No,
time.
it's not. It's not. I don't know. I don't remember exactly how I got introduced. I think there was a certain time where, like, senior year of high school, I had met some like theater girl, and she was like telling me about this music that she was listening to from like the '90s, and I was like pretending to be into it and like get into it. So I started like reading all those like lists of like best '90s albums to like try and like ingratiate myself to that. And
Yeah.
then it didn't work out with her, but then I started like really exploring that shit. So I started like listening to like Britpop and like all these genres I wouldn't have been listening to otherwise.
Hmm.
Yeah, like Britpop, classic rock, like Erica Badu, and like all these like random like artists that are like from like Rolling Stone's best albums of the '90s, like all these random. So I remember, I believe I came across the Nine Inch Nails album through that, and then I remember listening to an interview from Grimes where she said her album Getty Primes was like super inspired by this album. So then I gave this a listen, and I thought it was cool at first. I wasn't in love with it,
Yeah.
but for some reason, I think what really clicked with me was like a year and a half ago. I was at some club, and they played the song "Sin," and it just
Uh-huh.
like very well, it fit super well into just like whatever techno or like house they were playing.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is awesome. Like no remix or anything. It was just like just raw 130 BPM that song. And I was like, this is sick. And then so I re-listened to it, and then I don't know. It's such a replayable album. It's only 10 songs. Every song is like, has its own unique hit quality. There's not a lot of interlude or wasted
Hmm.
time. It's just like such a good front to back listen.
Yeah, I agree. Although I think it's really funny that you mentioned like that whole thing of it Sin being played in a club like relatively recently and it fitting, because I go back and forth in my mind of like this is either like the most cool ahead of its time kind of like
Yeah, or
underground
it's dated, or it's
thing,
dated. Yeah,
or it's
right.
dated as hell. Yeah, like, and I feel like the two
Yeah,
things seem to happen at the same time. There's definitely songs I feel like that have more of a dated edge than others, like a Sin, where I feel like the hook is just so strong and it's so straightforward that
yeah,
it will come in and out of vogue all the time, right? Depending on what's in fashion at the time. And then there's other times where there's like a like sound effects that are just like, okay, yeah, this was definitely made in 1989.
oh yeah. And you sent me that those demos, and
Uh-huh.
a lot of those guitar tones and the way that a lot of that shit sounded. It sounded like late '80s music. It sounded very it sounded very dated.
I,
So yeah,
Yeah, I can't get over those demos. So those are like, for anyone listening, watching, Purest Feeling, I think is like basically it was a bootleg that was released in the early 90s, not long after the main album came out. And it was effectively the leaked demos of what Reznor had been, I guess, cooking up in, the law is that he was a janitor at the local studio and they paid him basically in studio time. So in the midnight hours, that's when he would cook up what became Pretty Hate Machine. And those early demos of what have been leaked, and they're on YouTube. If you search "Pretty Hate Machines," what I sent to Ryan, um, I listened. It's been a long time since I listened to him. I listened to him when I sent him to you, and I was like, it's probably like obviously artists release demos, as part of bonus tracks or like re-releases all the time now. But this is
yeah,
probably like the biggest leap I've heard from an artist that's considered as highly as Trent Reznor is. Like the
yeah,
biggest leap from those demos to what the finished product is. Like they sound like if someone, a friend of yours was like, "Hey, I've just cooked up some like,"
yeah.
do you know what I mean? Like they're
Check
good,
out
but
my
they're
SoundCloud.
kind of
Yeah,
not.
yeah, yeah. Shout out to whoever mixed this. I know he had one person mix it originally, didn't really like it, and then he found a different guy, whoever that
Mm,
second guy was, and they agreed on that. Whatever. It sounds wonderful because I mean it is demos, you know what I mean, and that's another thing. Like, that's another thing I didn't quite understand before I started making music. That like, uh, your demos are not going to sound a thing like your finished product if you do it well, I would say.
mhm.
Um,
Well,
but
sometimes for
but
better or worse, right? Like I've made some music in the
true.
past myself, and it's like tried. love that scrappy demo version, and it's got so many bad qualities to it, but you also can't seem to ever capture the essence of like what it was when you try
Yeah,
and pump it up. It's a weird dichotomy.
yeah. No, I agree with you. There's something to like the one song I dropped, the Under God or whatever. The demo, I really liked the demo vocals better, even though they were like shittily recorded on a microphone and there was no vocal chain or anything. It was just like a microphone attached to a audio input or whatever. And we were just testing out like the echo just to see if how it sounded. And I
Yeah.
prefer honestly, I prefer those vocals, but because they have a kind of lo-fi quality to them that you can't quite capture in the studio, because in the studio everything is supposed to sound good and manufactured and like I don't know, it's hard to capture lo-fi kind of like underground type sounds and
Intentionally,
like yeah,
yeah,
it sounds forced when you try and do it when you try and do it not like you know
not
in
on
a demo-ish
purpose.
way. Yeah.
Yeah. And then so as part of those demos, the I guess the only great shame is, and I don't know whether I would consider it a guilty pleasure or not, but there's the track Maybe Just Once, which isn't included on Pretty Hate Machine, which is like probably it kind of reminds me of the track That's What I Get, in the fact that it's so like a teenager's diary in the sense of like
Yeah,
the
yeah,
lyrics,
yeah.
but kind of bangs at the same time.
That song, the song that made it the album, That's What I Get, is very funny. That's one of the songs that on this album that makes me laugh the hardest, because like every every song on here is like he's like trying to get a kiss or something.
Yeah.
Like it's like so dark and like spooky, mysterious, but he's like all the people I kissed or whatever. He's like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's weird. He has this weird like bated breath kind of way that he presents kissing. It's like it's very funny. It's very like
It is,
sexless.
yeah, it is like this weird thing, isn't it? This juxtaposition of like, on one hand, you've got Sin, where it's like very BDSM, like
Oh yeah,
inspired, and on the other hand, you've got like, a quaint little teenager that's trying to like get with someone like for the first time, or just had their heart broken, and there's like this collision
yeah,
of these two things. And sometimes I feel like I will listen to it in a certain mood, and I'll be like, nah, I'm not feeling it. Like,
yeah.
it does feel a little bit like, but then other times you listen to it and you'd be like, no, I'm in the mood for this. Like, come on, talk to me, Trent.
Yeah, yeah, there's only like one or two songs on here where like the lyric where it really kind of gets me like it like kind of what you're describing, like it gets really corny. Like that's what I get has its moments of that. The only time I think is the worst offender, like the chorus. It's like maybe I'm all messed up in you or whatever.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
It just sounds that sounds so dated. It sounds like it reminds me of like Huey Lewis in the News or something mixed with
Hmm.
like kind of like teenage angst. It's very cliche, but I don't know. The production just has its certain quirks that I really enjoy. Uh, is that the one that
Totally.
has like kind of like that kind of like Seinfeld bass? Uh,
Yes, there is a lot of that like slap bass sound. I feel like
yeah,
it's the only time definitely has some of it, and also I don't know if it's kind of I want to, and then obviously Sanctified has like the continuous loop of that, like,
Sanctified has the same, yeah, that bass as well.
yeah, that down 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 bit boom boom boom,
Yeah,
which
which
is cool.
yeah, it's from a drum machine actually. It's from the R50E. Because when me and Zoe first started making music, we were like looking up that we actually went to this album. We're like, okay, we're like, what like equipment did he use? You know what I mean? Because they use so many different synths and drum machines on this album. It's insane. Back in the day when they used to make albums, it would be like they had like one or two synths that they would go for, like a bass synth, like a lead synth, and then like one drum machine or something. This album,
Yeah.
it's just like so many. He has like tube synths. He has like this fucking oh my god, he has like this like shitty Yamaha synth that he like vocal synth that he uses for certain effects. But the bass, particularly on the song Sanctified, is from the R50E. It's like the Seinfeld bass, and we use it. That's the bass that we used on Under God as well.
Oh, that's cool. I love that. I love that you track that down. I do find it
Mhm.
interesting. Like, I read something in the lead up to this that like obviously Reznor's kind of quite well known for being a massive gear nerd these days, but like even back then when he must have been limited, it sounds like he was like way far advanced from what other people were doing in terms of like
Yeah,
sampling stuff, manipulating things, trying to like just take really get as much from a single machine as it possibly could.
right.
And adds to the sound as well.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's like such amazing studio trickery he does. Like it's so people are still trying to chase the sound to this day because it's so varied and so insane. And yeah, for sure. What was I about to say? I was about to say something about this. Oh, I really like also on this album. There's a couple of songs that do this. It's very like self-referential. So like
Hmm.
he'll have I'm trying to think of a good example. I think on what song was it? Let me just see. Let me see. Where's the one song where it like repeats the chorus? Let me just see. Oh, Kinda I Want to does this a lot.
Hmm.
It has samples from Terrible Lie. The pre-chorus samples the ending synth on That's What I Get. Um, yeah, there's like a
What?
couple songs that do that.
I
Yeah,
didn't actually pick up on that, like the terrible lie snippet in there. I'll have to listen back to that. That's pretty cool.
it's like it's like there's like this weird kind of echoed out audio sample or something that like you can if you listen to both those songs back to back, you can hear. I don't know if he just used the same machine or if he sampled or if
Hmm.
he recorded one song and sampled it for the next song or whatever. But there's like a lot of
That's so
self-referential stuff, which is cool. And what's there's another. I think I Kinda I Want to also, or maybe the song after that samples Down in It as well. There's like a breakdown that's basically just the same as the core as the verse from Down in It, which is cool. So
that's so cool. I love things like that because it just like builds such a like lore. I love an album that has that consistency. He's very good at doing that across the board, I think, on even like the later albums of like it sounds from one within one thing, whether it's using the
yeah.
same instruments or like motifs. He got better at like not better, but like started introducing like um in the downward spiral, there's that little lead line that finishes closer. It's actually the chorus of Heresy, and then it also comes up later on. Like he uses the same
Mhm.
notes, and those things are really cool. What
Yeah,
do
it
you?
creates a really holistic kind of like self-contained sound. But oh, sorry, what were you gonna say?
No, no, no. You finished that thought.
Oh, that was it. That was pretty much it. It just keeps the album like very self-contained and listenable, I feel.
Definitely. I was gonna say like, so what? So do you, because I've never seen much, you always reference Pretty Hate Machine, but less so the wider project of Nine Inch Nails. And I don't know whether that's just because I've missed that, but like, so are you a fan of the whole catalog? Is it this album in particular? Like, where do you stand in Nine Inch Nails overall?
I really love all of their music. This is just like the most accessible to me, and it's just the most loopable.
Hmm.
I just really like certain albums. It's just like um, certain albums to me, it's like the listenability and the kind of pop sensibility of it. Plus, just like you don't find the sound anywhere else. It just makes
Yep.
me really addicted to it. I like the EP that came out after this a lot, and and obviously the Downward Spiral is awesome. But the Downward Spiral to me is very like and the same with the Fragile. It's very there's a lot of ambient sounds, there's a lot of interludes, there's a lot of songs that are really long and like don't have a chorus. Like
Yep.
it's it's more experimental and I enjoy getting into those sounds when I'm in that kind of mood, but I feel
Hmm.
like this is kind of more of an every mood type of album or like I don't know. I just really I enjoy this album the most, I would say.
Yep.
Um those three albums are great. And then it kind of falls off with Teeth is kind of shitty because he got sober, but good for him. And then I kind of picked them back up around 2013. I really liked that album that came out at that time that has like Copy of a Copy and all
Hesitation
that stuff.
marks.
Hesitation
But
Marks is great. Bad Witch is great.
kind
So
of
all that stuff is
interesting
good.
because hesitation marks is almost a bit full. So you could almost make an argument that it kind of has more of a Pretty Hate Machine vibe than some of the work
Oh,
within
totally.
there. Like
Yeah,
that kind of like
yeah.
more light-hearted kind of disco-esque aspect to it.
Yeah, it has a real pop sensibility to it for sure. Yeah, it totally, it's like definitely like a comeback album of sorts where it like reconnects with kind of, it's return to form is the phrase that people use.
Hmm.
It definitely returns to the same form as Pretty Hate Machine. And even the same kind of like, even like the album cover, it has like the same kind of rusty, disgusting aesthetics of like, Downward Spiral. Um,
Totally. Well, I was wanting to ask about like your thoughts on the wider canon because I wanted to kind of like put this thought out into the world of like because I kind of almost come from the opposite perspective. So like Nine Inch Nails hit for me when I was teenager, and for some reason, it was when they put out their Year Zero album. I just was like, that kind of was the spark, and I went through all of
Ah,
their
okay,
catalog,
interesting.
and then Pretty Hate Machine was the very last album I got, and it was kind of this was we're talking like 2007, 2008, and so a lot of what I was listening to, I only had minimal access to the internet. At some point, like I would actually get punished if I did bad at school by like removing my internet access, which is like goes to show the time it was. So a lot of like how what I would
Yeah.
listen to be judged by the albums that I buy. I'd have my
Hmm.
like shitty part-time job and go to HMV and just like look at the CDs. And I remember buying Pretty Hate Machine and being like, I don't know how I feel about this. Like as I've just come off the back of all of this like fucking angry, hectic stuff.
Yeah.
And then to kind of come to this more poppy thing was just like a complete head fuck. And so based on that, my definitive versions of songs like Head Like a Hole, Terrible Lie, Down in It,
Hmm.
Sin, I kind of almost considered the live versions from like and All That Could Have Been and stuff like there's grittier, the ones that are presented by the live album. Like for me, those are
Hmm.
like the definitive versions rather than Pretty Hate Machine. But I don't know, what would your thoughts on that be? Do you
That
see
that
them as
makes
three?
sense. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, again, like same with like what I'm recording now. It's like the music that I'm going to record now, I have a very limited like scope or whatever, and I don't know how it's going to be put out, and I'm not going to have all those decisions. But like, let's say I drop this, and then like in 10 years, I'm like a millionaire or something off of music, and I'm going to go back to that and look at that, and if I perform those songs, it's going to be performed in like the most definitive version. So I kind of get what you're saying. I feel like
Yeah.
the live sound and all that kind of stuff. Like after you record this stuff, and after you get more of a budget, and after you get more of like I'm sure if he started off and they were like, here's $1 million, like here's a band, like record an album, he would have just done that.
Mm.
Um, these songs, it is really interesting. It's just very cool. Even though they're kind of small scale, and even though they're kind of like the Tame Impala, Kevin Parker one man army like version of the songs, I don't know which one I would say is the definitive. That's a really good question. I don't. I guess I haven't really listened to the live ones enough, but I don't know.
That might be
I think
that
that
might be the thing, right? Though, like, I guess it's what you're. I kind of went arse backwards through the catalog to end up at the
yeah,
first and
yeah,
last.
maybe these like mixes and stuff are a little bit more simple, or like the song structure are more simple, and you're used to like the kind of like full band like
It's just
craziness and the
almost
guitars. Yeah.
yeah, it's like the attack almost of like so like Terrible
Mm.
Lie. The guitar in that do do is like very kind of clipped and compressed in the Pretty Hate Machine version, whereas live it's like fucking three guitars.
It's like a real
Like
bass guitar. It's not like a dinky like
yeah,
sample
yeah,
from
yeah.
a drum machine from the 80s. Yeah, yeah, I feel you.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've never known a band that has like this on one hand was their breakthrough and those are some of their best songs, and yet maybe it is just me, but like to have these other versions out there that people kind of consider more the band than that. I don't know. It's a very interesting thing.
Yeah, I wonder if he went back and did like a Trent's version of this album in the modern day. I wonder if it would sound better or worse because he has everything at his disposal. It's kind of the same with like the Gorillaz. Like the Gorillaz' first album is kind of the same way, where it's like
Mhm.
I think literally I don't know if it's Clint Eastwood or 2000, where he just the melody is just like a sample. It's just like
Oh,
a preset
it's
from
Clint Eastwood. Yeah, it's like the Casio like rock thing. The dun dun
yeah.
dun 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 dun.
I'm sure if he went back and re-recorded that whole album and like made it more fleshed out, maybe it would sound different. But like, you can't discount like whatever his mindset was back then, where it's just like, okay, the label's not giving me enough money for this shit. Like, I have to just use this like preset. It's like lightning in a bottle, and
Yeah,
it's hard to recapture that when you try to like perfect it. And you can have all the money in the world, but you can't capture. Sometimes you can't capture that indie kind of spirit that people really gravitate towards. You know?
totally. And I can imagine as well, like Pretty Hate Machine. You could probably argue that like the souped up rock band versions of those songs, they're amazing in a live setting, and that's why they kind of exist and why he performs them as such. But would they have had the same impact and kind of created the same, I guess, like ripple in that
Mhm.
end of the 80s, early 90s, like Lollapalooza kind of
Mhm.
industrial, like that whole thing. Like it probably wouldn't have had the same thing because it would almost be too conventional, if that makes sense.
No, I agree with you. Yeah, it's on the album. The way that the album sounds is way different than the live setting, which is pretty cool. But it is a good transition from the synth pop and the kind of industrial of the '80s to kind of like the grunge and the rock and the Lollapalooza kind of stuff of the '90s. I agree with you on that. And the cool thing about this album too is that before this is like the first industrial pop album that I can really think of that had any sort of a major impact because like before this all every industrial song just kind of sounded like Skinny Puppy or like a Ministry where
Hmm.
the vocals are they sound like they're like deep fried like 8 times like every like albums like I don't know like what was the Ministry album like Land of Rape and Honey everything is like so
Yeah.
inaccessible and like not commercial and I appreciate this album for like taking that spirit of that music and the blessings of those people. Like I know the guys from like Frontline Assembly, the guys from Ministry, and the guys from there's a band called Meat Beat Manifesto. I don't know if you've ever heard of
Hmm.
those guys.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
They're awesome. But those really influenced his sound and like he kind of carried the torch into he kind of brought industrial into the mainstream with this album, which I thought was cool.
Definitely, definitely. I think one of the things I think is really interesting from the making of it that I found, I don't know if you've heard it, and for anyone watching this as well, I'd recommend it. He did a chat with Rick Rubin.
Oh yeah, yeah. That was
Yeah,
awesome. I love that.
it was so cool, and like some of the stories that like resonated with me was that when he was talking about the making of it, how he got to record. He only got to have two of the songs produced by Flood, and one of them was Head Like a Hole. And he kind of tells the
Mm,
story of how like initially that bow down before the one like that wasn't even the hook, that wasn't even the chorus. It was like he was like it was a 5 second snippet at the end, and Flood
mhm.
listened to it the first time and was like, what the fuck, that should be the chorus. So
Yeah.
it's crazy how much an impact a producer can have, something that I think people kind of think is someone that just twists knobs and sits on the sidelines, but actually arguably had the biggest impact on that album because it was the breakthrough song, right? I thought that was really
Yeah, totally.
interesting.
Yeah, and I noticed that now when I make stuff with my friend Zoe, which I really that's why I really like working with her so much because I have a very specific idea of like what the song is going to be in my head. It's like picking from this album and picking from funk and picking from '80s music and stuff like that. So I write the songs, I come up with them, and then I filter it through her, and then all of a sudden it becomes like a whole different thing. It becomes like like the chorus that I thought isn't really that good, but like this ending part like gets flipped over, and then all of a sudden it becomes like it becomes more of like a Drain Gang or like Blade style, production rather than like a funk '80s thing, which is like it's cool when you get a producer in the room, uh, because they can really make sense of what you're saying, especially if you get somebody who's honest and who can tell you like this idea, okay, like these ideas are cool. This idea is not going to work. So like just
Yeah.
abandon that. You know what I mean?
Well, it's someone coming in without the emotional attachment that you've had, right? Of like you've created it, and so you might think something is like so cool because you've labored over it versus something that just came to you like that and you don't have as much of an attachment. And a producer or someone with an outside view can be like, sorry to tell you, that thing that you spent a day working on, that kind of sucks. But this thing that just fell out of you, that's actually the best thing in the mix. And you need someone with that like kind of outside perspective to
E-
do that.
Yeah, even just like if you listen to the shit that you made or whatever, and you're like, okay, this is really cool. Sometimes you can play it to other people, and all of a sudden it's like you're listening to it through their ear or something like that, almost.
Oh, there's
Like,
nothing worse than that moment, to be honest with you. If you've like ever done you like, yes, this is the best thing ever. You like hit the space bar or press play in like a room of other people, and like you say,
yeah,
you just feel you're like, oh, it's the kind of the same like when someone gives you the aux and you're like, oh, I'm gonna drop an absolute banger, and then no, you immediately realize what you've done, and like everyone's just crickets, and you're like, oh shit, oh no.
yeah, it's not as cool. Sometimes stuff doesn't sound as cool as you think it does, which you know, uh, with music, you want to try and keep it you want to try and keep that singular vision intact as much as humanly possible and carry it throughout. But at the same time, the job of an artist at the end of the day, I feel like at least in the modern day, or at least what I want to do, or like what Trent wanted to do, or if you're making music, what you want to do, or even with this podcast, like just releasing it to an audience, you want to make sure that the audience is in mind, and you want to make sure that people enjoy it. It can't just be for you. If you want it just to be for you, cool. That's art. It's still art at the end of the day. But if you want to reach a wider audience, you have to expand outside of your taste and your purview and have other
Well, I
people
think
listen to it and stuff.
ideally that's like what that's what the magic of anything in the pop realm is, right? It's the collision of someone's vision with an understanding or a respect or a desire to kind of mix that vision with something
Mm-hmm.
that's going to resonate, and like that's where it creates its own separate point of art. Like sometimes I think that this is a way off tangent, by the way, but I don't have any other vehicle to make this point, so I'm just gonna you're my captive audience for it. But like
You're good.
on the tangent is that I was talking to someone about Liam Gallagher the other day, and he's released like a few solo albums, and they're fine. Like they're not amazing, but they're fine. But what I think is most interesting is because there's clearly from the management or from the team behind that, there's a view of like we want this to be able to be played on modern radio
Mm-hmm.
rather than just go into the adult contemporary, like 50-year-old Oasis fans. And
Yeah.
so there's some really interesting, arguably really interesting production happening because they're trying to take something that is fundamentally like seen as a bit of a pastiche Britpop sound and give it a modern, fresh perspective. So like he's got a song called Wall of Glass, which I think has really cool production on it, even if you don't necessarily think that the song's all that. So I think that I kind of bring this back to Pretty Hate Machine somehow, but like that same spirit of like I want to take these industrial elements that I really love, but I'm also a big fan of like pop music and colliding those things. It creates what someone might say is like a limitation actually
Oh
creates and
yeah.
breeds a whole new thing, you know?
Yeah, I think it loops perfectly back into the discussion because it's like, yeah, this album. It's like if you were an industrial purist or whatever. I know he doesn't even consider this album industrial, for example.
Hmm.
But like, if you were like an industrial purist or something, or if you're like a Skinny Puppy fan back then or whatever, and you're like, you want to hear all those the pastiches, kind of like what you're saying, like those like really fucked vocals. You want to hear like these specific guitar tones. You want to hear like this, the R50E, this specific drum machine. That's what you're used to. You want to hear those specific things. And when you have this, when he's like clean vocals, really clear chorus, verse, bridge, chorus, verse, whatever bridge structure, like classic pop structure,
Yeah.
uh, like a piano ballad, you know what I mean, in the middle of the album, that kind of thing. Those kind of things were probably frowned upon at first, or maybe it was seen as like a copping out, or like, oh, like you're just trying to get like a radio hit or something. Maybe that's like how it could have been seen at the time or something like that. But it was for the better because, as much as I love Ministry and as much as I love Skinny Puppy, I don't like any of their albums as much as I like this one, you know?
Yeah, exactly. It creates its own thing and then it's kind of created a legacy of other stuff after it. Um, I think one of the things that I from that same podcast that I thought was also like really admirable and just gives me so much more respect for Reznor is that I don't know if you remember this bit, but he was basically saying that like they had Flood for 2 days and then they flew him out to London to work with some guy. I have his name. It's John something, I think. John Fryer, who I guess if you put yourself in like Reznor's shoes, so this guy has like produced Depeche Mode, he's produced Peter Murphy, Wire. So I can imagine it's like quite a big deal. But he found basically, and I'm going to paraphrase here, but like basically it was what I would consider a bell end in that he just didn't care. He just didn't
Yeah.
care, it sounds like, and was very much like whatever. And apparently, or he says that basically, like on the second day, he just had to like stop him and be like, "Look, I know that you don't give a fuck and that you're going to produce another 100 albums, but like this could be my only ever time to do this. So
Yeah.
like,
It's brave. That's
I need to."
extremely brave.
I couldn't imagine how, like, yeah, that takes a lot. I mean, it's the right thing to do because it was his shot, right? And he did it, but yeah, I think it speaks to a lot of integrity to be able to do that at that age.
Yeah, because a guy like that might be like, well, like, we're still like a guy like that doesn't quite have he's like too entrenched, kind of like what you're saying, he's gonna make another album the next day. He's too entrenched in like the current meta that he's like, okay, like I need to produce like these synths to sound like this, the like synth pop, which was already out of the door. So if
Yeah,
he were to produce it that way, if you're gonna produce it like a Depeche Mode record, within 5 years, the shit's gonna sound dated. Nobody's gonna want to listen to it. And on top of
exactly.
that, like, yeah, this is definitely what separates the artist from like the kind of like uh this is what separates the Trent Reznors from like the Ed Sheerans or something,
Yeah,
where it's like I'm taking a very active role in the art, and it's like this guy's producing the thing and it sounds good, it sounds competent, but it's not what I envision. And to be able to be like, I'm not like the number one producer in the world and this guy is, but like I'm gonna override him because I know that that's not what it's supposed to sound like. I don't know exactly what it's supposed to sound like, but it's not
yeah.
that. Like to have that kind of like nebulous kind of like, it takes a lot of skill, I feel, on his end, and it takes a lot of balls to be
To back yourself,
fuck off.
be
Yeah,
like,
to be like
yeah,
fuck off, and I'm gonna get somebody else. Like, you know what
yeah,
I mean? And
yeah,
I'm sure his label was pissed off. I'm sure that mixing sessions cost a lot of money. I'm sure, each song could be like it could be up to like $1,200. This guy could charge like $200 per hour. This could have cost him a shit ton of money, but
yeah.
it was worth it because it made a whole career. You know?
Although apparently not. So like the TVT of it all, the label that he was on.
Yeah,
So the guy called it, and this is a direct quote when Reznor handed it and called it an
yeah,
abortion,
yeah. I
and
love that.
was basically like, you fucked up what could have been a good career. Like, good luck.
Yeah,
And I
right. That's what I'm saying. You have somebody saying to you, you're in your mind, you're like, I like just what I said, like I'm gonna make my career this way, and you have somebody saying like, no, you're like what you're thinking right there, like I'm thinking the same thing too, and you're fucking it, you're going that way, and you're fucking it up.
yeah,
And to even be like, no, like I'm not fucking it up, you're fucking it up. You must feel
wild.
crazy. You must feel gaslit. You must feel gaslit to be like everybody around you is like, this is not good. This is like you need to make it sound like this, and you're like, no, I want it to go this way, and you're right. Like that's probably why Kanye is so fucked up because everybody told him like your clothes aren't shit, your music isn't shit, you're never gonna do this, you're never gonna do that, and then he did all of it. And when people tell him to listen to now, when people are like, listen to me, Kanye, you can't do this or that, you
Yeah,
can't,
now he's like, no, I've proven a million times before that if I go against
yeah,
what you say, it's the best thing ever. So it's like
yeah, and
becomes this
I'm a
whole
genius.
twisted thing. Yeah, you're so
Yeah,
right.
I'm sure it builds up the ego. This is how egos build. That and drugs, and that's obviously like what made this album so great.
Totally, totally.
Yeah.
Well, the guy was obviously proven massively wrong and so good. Although I hated the fact that even when the album back then, I think hit 1 million units, I think he
Hmm.
even said he didn't even like, you know, come humble or whatever and go back to him. He was just like, well, your follow-up's got to do 4 million, otherwise it's not a success. It's like, what an absolute chode. That is.
Yeah. It's just
Um,
yeah, the people like that when they get proven wrong, it's a common tactic. It's called moving the goalpost.
yeah, yeah, totally,
You
100%.
always got to
Um,
be right.
but kind of moving full circle, one thing I wanted to ask was, did you get a chance to listen to the score that Trent and Atticus just put out for Challenges?
No, I haven't listened to it yet. I'm
I would
gonna see. It's good.
I would say it was just really interesting that we're talking about Pretty Hate Machine. And obviously, I don't know if there's an anniversary, but the only reason it came up is like I wanted to chat to you about Pretty Hate Machine. But Challenges came out, this thing, it came out Friday. So I only just put it on this afternoon. And it's actually like, it's tech, the director of the movie wanted techno. So it's like a pretty,
Oh,
like a techno
interesting.
thing. And then it's been mixed by Boys Noise. So what I don't
Yeah,
think
I
what they've
saw that.
actually I don't think what they've put out is the actual score. I think it's like 8 songs
It's a remix.
mixed. But
Mhm.
it sounds cool. And if you've just like we have just been listening to Pretty Hate Machine, like revisiting that for a few days, like if you put it on, it's like, wow, this is kind of quite full circle because it's definitely naturally by way of being a techno thing and being Trent, it kind of has a little bit of that flavor.
Yeah,
And it's cool that the artwork's all purple as well. It's kind of like hitting that same vibe.
these sounds are coming back. I feel I'm trying to get ahead of the industrial music wave with my new project because I feel as though
It's in the
I
air.
feel like it is definitely it's coming back, I feel. I gotta listen to that. I haven't listened to that yet, but I
Well,
really like their score for I really like their score for Bones and All. I thought that was a great score. From that was the same director, but his
yeah,
previous
right.
movie. I thought that
Yeah,
was an
and
awesome score.
how wild that the guy, like, I mean, I guess it makes sense. The guy's obviously a visionary and an artist himself, but like they produced this like from what I remember of that, like it's very acoustic, very delicate. It has obviously these moments of horror which match the story, but to go from that largely acoustic, delicate thing and then be like, guys, I want a techno, I want to fucking like rip ride and techno score on this one, and they're like, cool, okay, yeah, you got it. Like, again, speaks
Yeah,
to cool
yeah, they have great
artists.
versatility. I think that they're still great. I mean, they're in their 60s now. The two of them, Atticus Ross is in Nine Inch Nails, right? So the
Yeah,
two of them produce like every score, and they're still able to keep it so varied. I mean, they produced the score for Soul, the fucking Pixar movie. They
yeah.
produced like The Social Network. They produced like what else? Like everything.
Watchmen.
Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, Watchmen, all the Luca Guadagnino stuff except for the one that Tom York made. But like, yeah, like they have so
They
much
made
range.
they did a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles score
Yeah,
last year.
yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Wild.
They're nuts.
Um, all right, so like closing this out then, and you've kind of already alluded to it, but if you were going to try and convince someone of Pretty Hate Machine's legacy, what and like how influential it is, what, if any, artists, albums, or genres or like music would you kind of point to as having like some sort of roots back to Pretty Hate Machine?
This album, this album
Yeah,
specifically.
yeah, yeah.
Death Grips, definitely. All the clipping, definitely all the industrial rap stuff, and then
Hmm.
by extension of that, because Yeezus copied that stuff, Yeezus. And Yeezus made Billie Eilish, so Billie Eilish by extension.
Yeah, that's
Um,
true. I never thought of it from that angle.
yeah, it's like a series of influences, I would say, in a row.
I was thinking more from the
Uh,
hyperpop side. Like, do you see any of it, or are they drawing
oh,
from
interesting.
different
Hmm.
aspects?
I'm trying to think as far as hyperpop goes. I'm not so sure about hyperpop. I know that Grimes was really influenced by this album with Getty
Hmm.
Primes, and then with Grimes's breakout album with Oblivion and all that stuff. That's totally influenced by this for sure. That whole like she took like Adderall for 10 days and blacked herself out in like her apartment and like made this album on her keyboard and then got a band later, like same exact trajectory,
That
I would
wow,
say.
yeah, yeah. That
Grimes,
actually,
very
you're
Grimes.
so right. Is that the one after Art Angels that had like the black? It had like a couple of different art pieces of artwork as the cover. She changed it, but there's definitely a
That's
few
her newest.
tracks. Yeah,
Oh yeah. But
there's some
her
stuff
for
on there
her
I hear.
Getty Primes for sure was like it was a ripoff of this album. She even says that herself. But then the album directly following that, I don't know why I'm for
Yeah,
Visions is really even the cover, and same with Getty Primes is super. You can see the resemblance. Who else? Just I don't know, just like the general darkness of pop music. Uh, if you hear it and the experimentation, is I would say is pretty influenced by this overall. Arca, I would say Arca is probably influenced by Trent Reznor.
yeah.
Um, who
That would
else?
be, I would love to see. I mean, I don't know if anyone would because they're kind of charting their own path, but like an artist like Arca,
Hmm.
a collab with Trent and Atticus would be pretty epic, I think.
Yeah, that would rule. I agree. Um, the music that I'm making is,
Definitely.
I
Big
have a
up the
song
sacred.
coming out. Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, I have a song coming out. Like I want to drop it in the summer sometime, and that song takes from heavily from this album as far as literal sounds, like the bass I was telling you, like stuff like that. The drum machines used on this album were ported over. The song "Terrible Lie," the drum pattern that we use on that song is the exact same as "Terrible Lie." There's references to the kind of BDSM stuff, like like making somebody your effigy, that kind of stuff that comes up on the song.
Sick.
Um, I'm super influenced by this, but I know that there's a lot of other artists that are as well.
That's amazing. Well, the one thing I was going to say earlier, we didn't get to it, but when you were talking about that bass sound, that kind of slap bass Seinfeld sound is like, if you haven't seen
Mhm.
it, there's a version of Sanctified from 2013 where Pino Palladino was in the band as the bass player, and he's like crazy funk bassist, like kind of a weird fit for Nine Inch Nails. But
Mhm.
he plays it as it's originally intended, like kind of with as a slap bass piece, and he uses a fretless bass, and it is probably it's 100% like the best version of that song. I think it's absolutely, and like Trent as now a more mature vocalist, like proper, he really embodies it in the live thing, and just like I would wholeheartedly recommend checking out Tension 2013, the sanctified version. It is epic.
Oh yeah, I got it pulled up. I'm gonna definitely listen to that after this. And the other thing about like the new live stuff, which I think is cool, and like the kind of fully formed vocals and fully formed band, like you're kind of saying. I feel like back in the day, like there was definitely a cooler edge to the live performances. But if you listen to the vocals on like that '90s or like let's say like the 1990 tour for this album, whatever, the
Hmm.
vocals are pretty shitty,
Oh,
like
really?
live especially. Yeah, if you listen to the live album like version of this, or like live DVD or whatever on YouTube.
Hmm.
The tour for this and the tour for Downward Spiral, if you listen to his vocals, they're really not the best. He
Um,
definitely came into his own. I would say that's probably because of the drugs. I think it takes like by the Fragile tour is when I think he really starts to come into his own as a live vocalist. I would say.
yeah. It's what certainly an art. He's certainly an artist that like his voice literally changes from if you were to put him in Pretty Hate Machine to like even with teeth, but like Bad Witch, it's like crazy
Mhm.
the level of depth that it gets, but then like the range. And I also think it's what's really interesting with Trent is like I wouldn't be surprised. I'm just guessing, but he seems like a very calculated person that like from with teeth onwards, he seemed to have kind of decided that like if I'm going to tour for the next like 20 or 30 years, I really can't like scream in the way that I did on Downward Spiral. So if you notice that like he still has aggressive songs, but he has a different, he doesn't, he gets there in a different way than screaming, which I'm sure is kind of like his pragmatic way of being like, no, I've got to be able to tour this like into into
Yeah,
my older age.
yeah. With Pretty Hate Machine and with Downward Spiral and with the Fragile, like that trilogy of albums, it was definitely like a drug fueled, anger fueled, like no therapy, like um not diminishing returns, but like he didn't really have. I don't think he had like a as far as his vocals go, or as far as like things lasting long. I don't think he was thinking about any of that. Like, oh, if I scream at this live performance, like that's going to tear my vocals. I don't think he was thinking about that. It was
No,
he was it
definitely not.
was very raw and like uncalculated, which made for I would say made for better music. But I think yeah, like as you said, his live performances are certainly way better the further into his career, which is cool.
100%. So what then final thing, Pretty Hate Machine, what do you if you were like rating an album, do you give it is this a 10 out of 10 for you? Like where would you put it?
Like it's somewhere in between a 9 and a 10 because specifically the I think it's called the only what is it the only thing or something. It's like
The
the
only
second to
time.
last song. That song, that song, that song. I really go back and forth on. It's really not that good. It's very dated. Um, it's not quite. It is a masterpiece and it is very influential, but it's not quite a 10. It's like a 9.6 or something. It's like right. It's right there, but it has some dated elements that draw it back slightly. I would say.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you in the sense that like we say, it'll go back and forward all the time, and it will kind of depend in what era you're like revisiting it. But there's something about it that makes it's not quite timeless because of the production techniques, but at the same time, like you say, depending on what era you're in, as you're saying, there's like a kind of throwback thing happening that's kind of pulling more into this kind of like industrial synth pop thing that kind of makes some of it sound really forward thinking, but then if we listen to it in 10 years time, it will kind of go back the other way. But
Yeah.
it's kind
If
of had to be that way, I guess. Like it wouldn't have achieved the innovation that it achieved without leaning into some of those things at the time. If that makes sense.
Yeah. If I had to really stand on business and be like, okay, like their definitive album or something, what is their masterpiece? Obviously, it's like Downward Spiral because it's like it improves on every single front. That this album, whatever this album does, that album does way better, way more experimental. Lyrics are better. production's better, like vibe is cooler, like the vocals are better. Everything is better on that album, I would say overall. But
Mhm.
something about like I really respect and I love an album that's like 10 ready-made perfect singles, no interludes, no atmosphere, none of that shit. Just like straight up, just give me like 10 of your best songs.
Yeah,
I could
solid,
really
solid pop
get down with
songwriting.
that. Yeah, I can't get over. I love just the DIY quality of this and
I
the
also,
long-lasting impact it's had. You know.
I think on that point as well, like it's probably the same thing that we maybe laugh about it a little bit, but like the way that the lyrics, the themes, the vocals are so raw, like it is so much like this is this guy's like journal in a way that like in future albums he's lyrically he's always been quite on the nose. Like I think even Trent Reznor would probably say that like he's lyrically he has moments of brilliance. Like Hurt obviously is an incredible song, incredibly written song, even the lyrics. But for the most part, he has a very like angsty way of writing, and it's what gives it its charm. But he after Pretty Hate Machine, it kind of on Broken and Downward Spiral, it's like finding ways of amping up the aggression that didn't feel quite as like reading from my high school
Yeah,
diary.
yeah. Further on, it's like showing without telling. This is more like you write your first screenplay and you write way too much dialogue, and then you like
Yep.
go to film it, and you're like, oh, I could have just had a shot convey this rather than me being like, I'm angry. And you can just have like, you know, a clenched fist or something like a really nice, well lit, clenched fist or something that implies like something's going to happen next, rather than like I am angry and I'm going to hit you. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah,
That's
yeah.
like that's kind of yeah. I think he does way better at I think he does way better at atmosphere and way better at just really on all fronts with the further albums. But despite how on the nose these lyrics are, and despite how even like Down in It is like kind of a corny, kind of hokey as far as like the delivery and stuff. It's like it's very dated, but
And it's got that
I don't know.
nursery
I
rhyme
love it.
aspect, but it's like this the collision of all of those things, right? It kind of it's
It has a
its own
raw
thing.
energy. It does something for me that no other album, even any of other their album, even any of their other albums can't do for me. So I just always have to give it a tip of the hat. Like, if
100%.
I could go my whole life only listening to like 10 albums, this would be one. This would be in there for sure.
Hey, thanks very much to Ryan for giving up his time for a chat. Hope you enjoyed it. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Cheers, mate. Bye.